I'm going to try something a little different, and just keep your fingers crossed. Living on the road, my friend, was gonna keep us free and clean, but now you wear your skin like iron, and your breath's as hard as kerosene. Pancho and Lefty is a widely covered country folk tune written by Townes Van Zandt. It tells the story of two old outlaws and the different ends they meet. It's a song of myth and legend, but it reminds me of two real outlaws I used to know, Big Ray Jicha and his best friend Roger. Big Ray grew up rough on the east side of Cleveland during the Depression in World War II. He lost his mother at age 2 and his father at 15. At 16, he knocked out a Marine drill sergeant in the Golden Gloves boxing tournament. The kids at school were impressed. So were the guys at the gym, who put him to work running numbers and making collections. He graduated to armed robbery by the time he was out of his teens, and for his 20th birthday, they gave him 5 years at Mansfield State Penitentiary. Mansfield is the happy place where they filmed The Shawshank Redemption. That's where he met Roger. Roger was the same age, but already on his second bit for grand theft. They were two of a group of guys that met inside and became friends for life. These were the men Ray Kent considered his peers. They were the fraternity brothers, bandmates, and fellow soldiers of other men's lives. After prison, Roger and Ray took separate paths for a while, but stayed in touch. And when Big Ray's decade-long attempt to join the squares fizzled out with me as the only tangible result, they rode together again. They were a good team, the boxer and the thief, but they could not have been more different. Ray was ill at ease away from his guys, self-aware of his crudities, always hunched in a defensive crouch. But he was as smart as he was tough, cagey and quick-witted. He could see all the angles. Roger was gregarious and nimble, a second-story man, a talker and a dreamer. He lived to score, always rolled large, and cycled in and out of prison most of his adult life. For him, it was the cost of doing business. Big Ray took a different route. He said prison's for the birds, man, and he did his best to avoid big trouble. After Mama left him and we moved away, he took up residence in the Hotel Sterling, a 5-story temple of gambling, drugs, and prostitution in downtown Cleveland, where he could blend in and keep his business off the street. From the Sterling, he worked a variety of semi-legit jobs and part-time hustles: desk clerk, lotto jockey, porn projectionist. He trained fighters, collected for bookies, and busted heads for the union. On the side, he dealt drugs, arranged dates for some of the girls he knew, and brokered stolen goods. It was more famine and feast in those days, but at least his time was his own. 4 or 5 times a year, he'd hitchhike down to South Carolina, where me and Mama wound up after her disastrous third marriage, and stay with us in the condo complex us kids called the Divorce Villas. In the mornings, we'd hang out by the pool. In the afternoons, we'd fish cane poles off the dock. We'd walk to the store for smokes and comic books. We'd play pinball or get a hot dog. We went to the movies. If a Rocky movie came out, we'd wait until his next visit to see it together. Afterward, we'd make Mama drive us over to the school so we could run around the track. Big Ray would run in his street shoes and slacks and shadow box as he went. He'd have to walk most of the last 3 laps, but over his Opry Run cigarette, he'd always say, "I bet if I stayed another week, I could make the whole mile." He may have been a drug dealer, a pimp, and a thug, but he was a regular dad to me, more present than those of a lot of the kids that I knew. I didn't get to know Roger until I got older and started coming back to Cleveland to visit Big Ray at the Sterling. He was tall and trim with the thin mustache of a riverboat gambler and a tide of wavy white hair. A signature fresh carnation always adorned the lapel of his sport coat. He ran a burglary and safe-cracking crew out of Collinwood, a Cleveland suburb popular with mid-level wise guys. They ranged over a 5-state area and had everything from big box retail to pharmacies to laundromat coin boxes. For my 16th birthday, he and Big Ray took me to a strip club, then out to a bar where I ordered pina coladas and waxed rhapsodic over my favorite dancers. Big Ray razzed me a little for being such a cherry, but Roger disagreed. He said I had a good eye for talent and that he also had enjoyed a pina colada or 2 in his day. It was all bullshit, but that was Roger. On the way out to the car, a crazy lady came up to us babbling about money for gas. Big Ray grunted and plowed ahead, but Roger stopped and took the woman's hand. It was a raw, sloppy winter's night, but he stood there and listened to her story. She needed $4 to get to her son's house. Then she could pay us back. Of course, dear, he said, as he peeled a $5 off his roll and folded it into her palm. Sometimes when I'd visit, he'd be back in jail, then out again the time after that. The summer I lived at the Sterling, he was in. But the summer I hitchhiked cross-country, he was out and laid 100 ritalin on me to take, trade, or sell as the need arose. As the 80s gave way to the 90s, times began to change. The Sterling was long gone, condemned and torn down. All the old Mansfield guys had died or drifted off. Roger and Ray would sit around and brag how they were the last of the real cowboys. But in the pauses you could tell they wondered how long they could keep it going, and how it would end. They were neither as swift nor as strong as they once were, not that they'd admit it. One night Roger took a date to a corner bar and a friend of hers called him Grandpa. Roger rose to the challenge, but the younger man decked him with one punch. Embarrassed, Roger pulled his pistol and backed the guy down, but 20 people saw it and the cops hauled him in. Used to be that was a bar fight, my dad said in protest. Now it's a felony. The 90s had ushered in a raft of harsh new tough-on-crime laws, mandatory minimums, gun enhancements, 3 strikes, 0 tolerance. The ground had shifted beneath their feet. Roger passed on a plea bargain and the judge slapped him with 4 years. They'd be over 60 by the time he got out. I saw Roger one more time. I was in town on break from graduate school and went with a couple of the younger guys from his crew out to the house in Collinwood to hang out and do drugs. The young woman who lived there was Roger's sort of surrogate daughter, someone he had looked after since she was a girl as a promise to a friend. They all called me Professor. Another beer, Professor! And we laughed and got high while we watched a ball game on TV. Roger came by later and tried to get things rolling again, but it was kind of like seeing your boss dance at the office Christmas party. The next I heard, some neighborhood mook roughed up the girl. To avenge her honor, Roger pistol whipped the guy and put him in the hospital. Everyone knew he did it. A warrant was issued for his arrest. With his record and the prior gun charge, he was looking at life. At 65, he was looking at life either way. He slipped the noose and made it down to Big Ray's, but they knew it was only a matter of time. For 3 days they got high and talked about the old days and all their best scores. But Roger kept saying, I ain't taking no third strike. I ain't taking no third strike. When the sun came up that last day, Roger got up and put on his sport coat and got ready to go. I need a fresh carnation, was the last thing he said. Roger died in a lonely room along the highway not far out of town. He looked good when they found him. He made sure of that. I first heard Pancho and Lefty after I moved to Portland to get in on the .com boom, and, in an unrelated event, fell in love with Emmylou Harris. It was her version that caught my ear, especially the last verse when she sang, Poets sing of how Pancho fell, Lefty's living in a cheap hotel, the desert's quiet and Cleveland's cold, so the story ends we're told. After it ended, I wrote Big Ray a letter. I know we haven't talked in a while, but I just heard this new song and it reminds me of you and Roger so much it's kind of blowing my mind. I quoted the lines above and then continued. Pancho needs your presence true, but save a few for Lefty too. He only did what he had to do. Now he's growing old. Big Ray had declined precipitously after Roger's death. Unable to make any more money, he slipped into a grinding poverty. His health failed, but he resolutely refused to do anything to help himself. To top it off, after a lifetime of epic drug abuse, he finally met his match when he discovered heroin eased his chest pains. That's when the phone calls started. Hospitals, neighbors, landlords, asking me what to do. I didn't know. After a heart attack and 2 ODs, I turned my back on him. Mama told him when I moved. He replied to my letter. Tell me about it. The only fun I get to have anymore is cheating death. It ain't easy, but it's still interesting. We exchanged more letters and then talked by phone. Things were better between us before he rode off for the last time later that year. Pancho and Lefty broke the ice. I owe it for that. Of course, no song quite fits life exactly, A closer listen reveals the strong suggestion that Lefty betrayed Pancho to the Federales for the money to get back to Ohio. There would be none of that between Roger and Ray. They'd sooner spit in a cop's face than rat. And I could give you for instance if we had more time. Roger is not Pancho and Lefty is not Big Ray. Rather, they are analogs, echoes. That never bothered me, but these lines did. Pancho met his match, you know, on the desert in Mexico. Nobody heard his dying words. Nobody heard his dying words. What were Pancho's dying words? I was just dying to know. I'm going to close tonight with a song I wrote to answer that question. I think he spoke them to Lefty. And this is what I think he said. Take a picture of me. Take a picture of me. This may be the last time we'll see these things together. In the future when your grandchildren ask, Papa, who was that man in the mask? You can say, once upon a time, there was a man who turned his back on the West. He played his hand too far away from his vest. You can say, he was a friend of mine. Take a picture of me. Take a picture of me. This may be the last time we'll see these things together. At your weddings when the old people dance, the kids will laugh and say when we get the chance, we'll remember. But it's not to be. At your weddings when the old people dance, the kids will laugh and say when we get the chance, I'd like to be there. Take a picture of me. Take a picture of me. Take a picture of me. This may be the last time we'll see these things together. Tell them I had to find a place of my own. Tell them to try the door if nobody's home. Tell them not to linger too long. Future's not the only thing you can lose. Others are not the only ones you can use. The best endings are the ones you choose. Thank you. If you want to learn more about Roger and Ray and life at the Sterling, I've got books for sale. You can find me at the bar. Thanks, Adam. Thank you.